Hello, everyone. I'm James Miller with the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts. Welcome to Nature Connects. Nature Connects is our webinar series intended to provide an opportunity for you to hear from and ask questions of some of the Nature Conservancy's incredible staff and partners in Massachusetts, and as of today, around the world. We've had wonderful turnout so far for these webinars. Please know that it's incredibly encouraging for us at the Nature Conservancy to have so many people with us. Thank you for being here. And a special welcome today to friends from Delaware, Pennsylvania, Washington State, and Rhode Island. Welcome. Yesterday, of course, marked the 50th Earth Day. We're really excited to keep that energy going and have, for the first time on Nature Connects, a guest speaker representing one of the Nature Conservancy's programs from another part of the globe. Today, we welcome Matt Brown, TNC's Regional Managing Director for Africa. Since beginning work in Africa in 2007, the Nature Conservancy has expanded its presence to 9 countries. Those are Angola, Botswana, Gabon, Kenya, Namibia, Seychelles, South Africa, Tanzania, and Zambia. These nations are equivalent in size to well more than half the United States, continental United States, with a cumulative population of about 225 million. As Regional Managing Director for Africa, Matt provides strategic leadership for 110 TNC staff members in Africa, as well as in the United States and in London. Prior to his current position, Matt served as TNC's Director of Conservation for Africa for 11 years. Before that, he served as a Peace Corps volunteer, a forestry volunteer in northern Ghana. He worked with the UN in Eritrea and lived for 8 years in Tanzania. In case you're wondering, Matt does have a New England connection. He grew up in Newton and Watertown here in greater Boston, and he did his undergraduate work at Colby College in Maine. Before earning his master's in environmental science at Indiana University. Before turning things over to Matt, just a few notes about our setup. All webinar attendees are muted. Matt will present for about 20 minutes, and after that we'll be taking your questions. You can enter questions in the Q&A box on your screen. Enter them at any time during the presentation or discussion. Sometimes we get a lot of questions, which is fantastic, and we apologize in advance if we don't get to them all. Let's see. Also, if you have any trouble with your view on screen, there is a pull-down menu near the center of the screen where you can choose Fit to Window, and that likely will get you the correct presentation view. If you have any technical problems, please reach out to us via the chat box, and we will do everything we can to help you. Thanks again so much, everyone, for being here. And thank you, Matt, and welcome.
Great, thanks, James. Appreciate this opportunity. Great partnership with the Massachusetts program. And thanks to all of you who are joining. Special hello to my folks, Webb and Jeff Brown, who I hope are on the line. Sarah Jolliffe, Martin Brigida, Brownie Joyce, and others. So thanks for tuning in today. Liz, if you could go to the first slide here. So the Nature Conservancy started our work in Africa in 2007 in response to a lack of protection of grasslands globally. So this took us to East Africa and Southern Africa with that original focus, and then we've branched out from there. The first thing we did when we started the program was to ask the question, where specifically should we be working? For what reason, with whom, and what were our objectives going to be? We wanted to be complementary to all the other work that existed on the continent. And so we did a science process, a priority setting process that helped us to strategically think about where those landscapes and seascapes and freshwater systems were that had greatest chance of success that Nature Conservancy could help work with. That science today still informs where we're working. It's a great tool to help us think about expansion and new projects. And if you look at the map that's on the screen, that's brought us to these 9 countries. So Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, Botswana, South Africa, Namibia, Angola, Gabon, and Seychelles. We work in marine ecosystems, we work in freshwater ecosystems, and we work in terrestrial systems. Most of our terrestrial work in Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, Angola, and Namibia is focused around big, intact, functioning landscapes. Landscapes where there's a lot of wildlife and some national parks, and then a lot of people. People who are fishing, people who are farming, people who are raising cattle, people who are harvesting timber. And what we are trying to achieve is a more harmonious balance between people and nature in these large landscapes. I mean, these are 10 to 15 million acre landscapes. And a lot of that work brings us to working with local communities, indigenous groups like the Hadza, the Maasai, the Samburu, and trying to find ways to make sure that people see value and see benefit from wildlife. If you can go to the next slide, please, Liz. So it's been really fun to grow this program. I mean, real quickly, James, you mentioned this, but we're currently 110 people. I was the second hire, so we've gone from 1 or 2 people now to 110. This is a picture from a team retreat we had a year and a half ago in Tanzania. The program has representation from 12 different nationalities, and we're about a $30 million a year operating unit. Our focus in Africa is the same as the Nature Conservancy globally. We have one mission: to protect the lands and waters upon which all life depends. We focus on the conservation of ocean, land, water, and on climate mitigation and climate adaptation. And just like the Massachusetts chapter, I always talk about sort of 3 discriminators for the Nature Conservancy. Number 1, our science. Number 2, our convening power and belief in partnerships. And then number 3, our creative financial solutions that help us achieve our mission. Liz, if you go to the next slide. So let me jump right in a little bit here. This is a young bull, male elephant that we know pretty well. This elephant lives at a place called Loisaba, which is a 60,000 acre wildlife conservancy in northern Kenya. And this bull elephant has got his ears up. He's obviously been at a water hole. The dark is wet that he has sprayed on himself. He's probably about, I think I took this picture, he's probably about 20 feet from the Land Rover. He's communicating right now to make sure we see him, just in case we didn't see him. He's got his ears up, he's posturing. If you were in a different setting, you might have someone flexing their muscles or shoving their chest forward. He's telling us that he's here and that we should make sure that we see him. And this is one of 800 elephants that call Loisaba home. So they're resident here. Loisaba is unfenced like most of the protected areas in Africa. And this elephant and all the elephant will move, almost 100 kilometers within a season in search of grass and water. But they come back here during the peak of the dry season. Loisaba has a lot of springs, so really good water during even the driest of times. And so the Nature Conservancy helped conserve Loisaba. We helped convert it from a cattle ranch to a wildlife conservancy. And it's a critical habitat and a good example of the way that we work. So we use elephants a lot to look at the viability of the landscape. We can put a collar on them that sends a signal through a satellite, through GPS. It sends a signal every hour. And then we can look at where the elephants are moving, and we can design our next conservation investment to help protect those corridors or those parts of the habitat where elephant are moving, and particularly where they're moving quickly. You can see the rate of travel with elephants, and where they spend a lot of time is where they feel safe, and where they run or move quickly, you can see the dots, further apart, is when they feel threat. And so we've used elephants for years as sort of our indicator species to try and look at landscape connectivity and functionality. But if you can go to the next slide, Liz. When we protect habitat at a place like Loisaba and community conservancies and even the national parks, we might use elephants as the kind of key indicator for terrestrial functionality, but the small antelope like this, the dik-dik, the smallest of all the antelope, an animal that mates for life, are also important, and they're also captured within the work that we do. And so by focusing on these big charismatic animals like elephants, we're also capturing all the plants and all the insects and all the small other animals that that live in this habitat. Liz, if you could go to the next slide. So at a place like Loisaba, most of the bills are paid by tourism. When you show up as a visitor, it might cost you $400 a night to stay here. About anywhere from $80 to $100. It depends on the reserve, but a pretty high percentage of your bed night fee actually goes to support the conservation work in that area. Meaning it pays ranger salaries, it pays the radio operator, it pays the accountants, and it also creates a lot of jobs, right? So this guy here is a friend of mine. His name is Brown, no relation to me. He's a safari guide. He's a Samburu, so he runs cattle. In our terminology here in the U.S., he'd be a local rancher. He has a little farm that he owns about 100 kilometers north of Loisaba, but he works full time as a safari guide. He's a trained silver-rated safari guide in Kenya. And Brown's been employed for a long time by Loisaba, and he drives clients around all day. Loisaba has an operating budget of about $1.2 million a year. Half of that covers the wildlife protection. So these are rangers that are walking around, that are driving around. There's an airplane for surveillance. They're trying to stop poaching, both meat poaching for sustenance and ivory poaching at other places, rhino horn too, not at Loisaba, but at other reserves. So here's the problem that we're facing today. With the coronavirus and this global pandemic, no one's traveling. No one's allowed to come in and out of Kenya. 20% of Kenya's GDP is based on tourism. And a small reserve, a 60,000 acre reserve like Loisaba, heavily depends on tourists who come and create jobs, create revenue that can be used to protect the wildlife and to provide benefit for local people. So we're in a very serious situation where, with the sudden drop in tourism, and if you can go to the next slide, Liz, the various colors represent different countries. There's a key at the bottom there. Tanzania, as an example, on average sees 2,000 visitors a day in the country for ecotourism, for wildlife. In March, we watched those numbers go from 2,000 a day on March 1st to 7 visitors on March 23rd. Just a complete and total drop. And with that comes all the revenue that supports the Tanzania National Park system. I mean, Tanzania sees 2.3 million visitors a year. At a place like Loisaba, all tourism has stopped, and worse yet, all bookings have been pulled off the books. So we're forecasting no tourism for 12 months at a place like Loisaba. So it's quite an impact, as you can imagine. If you can go to the next slide, Liz. So the tourism revenue, supports sniffer dogs like Warrior and Machine here. These are bloodhounds. The bloodhounds are used to track poachers or track anyone who's done illegal activity on Loisaba. But they're also used to track any kind of bad incidents that happen in the community lands outside of the protected area. I think I have a slide a little bit later. There's a picture of an old man who's had some cattle that's been stolen, and actually these dogs were able to help get his cattle back. And so the benefits from wildlife extend greatly into the community. In Tanzania, the tourism efforts there actually help fund protection for farmers against elephants that come out of the national park and raid their crops right about this time of year. And the funding goes to support these groups of community members who walk around at night with really bright flashlights and actually Roman candle fireworks, and they scare the elephants out of the cornfields back into the national park with a 90% success rate, 90. So there's a lot of benefit to local community from these rangers, women and men who are on the front line. So yeah, we're concerned about being able to pay their salary. We're concerned about being able to put fuel in the vehicles. These guys are incredibly dedicated. Most of them will work for several months without pay, but they too have families. You know, they too have bills to pay. So the drop in tourism is pretty serious. Liz, can you go to the next slide? So this is a great picture. This is a picture of, this is the Awaso Primary School, which is just east of Loisaba Conservancy in Kenya. This is a library that was funded by the tourism revenue at Loisaba. These kids are getting on laptops to do a Skype call with a middle school in Albany, New York. So the days of pen pal are over. You know, with those airmail letters that we used to do as we were kids, and these guys are doing, they have pen pals who are now video call friends, and they're doing one-to-one calls with students in the United States. Great way to modernize learning, get the kids familiar with computers, and have them realize that the world is small and that they can talk to people and help them practice their English, talk to people in a different part of the world. Again, a benefit and support that is created because of tourism. Can you go to the next slide, Liz? Yeah, so here's the image I referenced earlier. This ranger on the left works for, he works for a partner of ours called Northern Rangelands Trust. And this MZ, this old man, who's probably, either a Maasai or a Samburu pastoralist, has had some young warriors steal 8 of his cattle. And the security team tracked with dogs, they tracked the cattle. They went, they apprehended him, and they brought the cattle back to this old man. And so he's shaking his hand saying, thanks for helping me out, particularly at a time when, you know, he wouldn't have had the resource to do anything about it himself. So focusing on wildlife and conservation is bringing benefit to local people. And just another example of how, you know, the impact that we do is more than just animals, wildlife, I mean. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of some women in Northern Kenya also, through our partner, the Northern Rangelands Trust. This is a group of beaters. And you can see the woman in front, she's got beads around her neck, and these other women, if you look closely, they're actually beading. They use like a sewing needle, and they bead necklaces and jewelry. So we've created a for-profit company that's working with these women. There's now more than 1,000 women involved in this program, and they earned $47,000 in 2018 by selling beads in Australia and in the United States and in Europe. Really important strategy for us. We have learned, and there's a lot of literature on this, that by investing in women, more than by investing in men, we get greater return to that social support from the local community. Not a big surprise, but women run most of the households. They pay the school bills. They keep track of the children. They, you know, really help put the food on the table. They take care of the medical needs. By putting money in the hands of women directly, you know, we're helping them and helping to really change the way that people are thinking about their own lives and livelihoods, and helping to make sure that there is a bright future for people. And that's actually a pretty key strategy for our work in Africa. Across all of our programs, we're investing in savings and loan programs. We have about 2,000 women involved in those across Kenya, Tanzania. And we've helped a lot of households earn greater money and have better market access. Even our work in Cape Town on securing water, we're hiring women. So really investing in women and focusing on their access to reproductive health care and their involvement in local decisions, what we call governance, local bodies is a critical strategy for the Africa region here. So yeah, I mean, a lot of the work that the Nature Conservancy does with our partners is a wide net around conservation. We care about wildlife, we care about biodiversity, we care about fresh water, we care about marine systems. And to make sure that those resources are well conserved for future generations, we work with local people, we empower women, and we draw a wide net that includes education and healthcare and a set of sort of non-traditional partners to help us achieve those means toward protecting the biodiversity that we're focused on. Africa's a great continent. These countries are fantastic if you haven't visited. If you have future plans to visit, tourism does make a big difference. It really does drive the work that we're doing. We realize it's fragile. We are looking at carbon. We are looking at other forms of diversification of revenue. When tourism works, though, as I've tried to explain today, it brings multiple benefits to both people and nature. And it's a great program that we run, and we'd love to host any of you there at any time. So please, Karibu Sana, welcome, come visit. James, let me turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Matt, thank you. Such a eye-opening, incredible presentation. And I suspect I'm not the only one for whom the message of travel, that tourism to Africa can be a good thing, that resonates. So thank you. We have one question, and it was a question that I wanted to ask you anyway. And you talked a little bit about the impact of the COVID-19 situation on tourism, revenues, and local people. Question is, what actions can people take to support the locals? How can we make a difference now?
Yeah, thanks, James. So we've started a crisis fund, which is really designed as a sort of a Band-Aid fund for the next 12 months to help pay ranger salaries, to help keep those women and men doing their job and keep the protection up. So I mentioned the downturn in tourism. The other factor, James, is that with the slowdown in the economy and people getting laid off, there's more poverty and people are more desperate. So we actually see greater risk of poaching. I've been saying anything with a horn is at greater risk today than it was a month ago. And that's to feed the illegal wildlife trade market. So this fund that we've created, if you go to nature.org/Africa, you can give to it. We've calculated about a $3 million loss in tourism for the specific reserves that the Nature Conservancy supports. And so we're trying to do our part and raise about $2 million. We've made pretty good progress toward that goal. Every amount counts, though. I mean, $25 makes a difference and will help, keep a ranger in the field for a day. It'll put fuel in a vehicle. So all amounts help, James.
Matt, thank you. And to everyone, we will, after today's conversation and presentation, we'll be sending out a thank you to everyone. And that will also include some of the information we discuss. So you have another opportunity to get to that. Picking up on one of the things you just mentioned, Matt, question is, what do you forecast regarding the poaching rate during this crisis?
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, in South Africa, we've seen an uptick already. There's been some rhino poach, a lot of meat poaching. We've had one poaching incident that I know about in Kenya, about 30 kilometers east of Lewa Wildlife Conservancy. It was a young male, 25-year-old male elephant who was poached for his tusks. They've caught the guy, they've apprehended him. If he gets prosecuted in the court, James, he will get a life imprisonment punishment. Kenya has really ramped up its punishment. So it's about risk and reward. We do think the poaching is going to go up. We do think the meat poaching for sustenance and the wildlife trade poaching is going to go up. And what we're trying to do is just keep the protection efforts as strong as we can during this time.
Matt, looking through some of the questions, and thanks everyone for asking them, and please continue. How can people be sure they're being guided by the right kind of organization when they visit a country in Africa?
Mean like a tourism operator and or a conservation organization?
That's how I would interpret the question, yeah.
I mean, look, you can always do your homework. You know, I always encourage people, whether you work with a travel agent in the United States and or if you happen to be working with someone directly on the continent, I think it's a fair question to ask, of my total price tag, what percentage of this expense is going to go toward conservation? Or you could ask it another way. You know, what is the bed night fee at Tarangire National Park? What's the gate fee? And hey, what percentage of that goes to conservation? If you're going to a reserve like Loisaba, okay, so you're charging me $400 a night. How much of that $400 actually supports the rangers? So like any consumer thing, you know, I think as consumers, we all should be empowered to ask the right questions. And, you know, there's also some websites, Sustainable Travel International is a good one that has a kind of a rating scheme, James, that you can look at. But yeah, or reach out to TNC. You know, I'm happy to help provide thoughts on that. I have an unofficial safari business on the side where I don't charge people to give them good advice. So it's not much of a business.
No, and I'm sure it's appreciated. And that's really great advice. And thank you. My question is, how are the Hirola doing? The questioner is asked, saying that she was not in Kenya when the program was just beginning for them.
Yeah, so the Hirola are an antelope. The Hirola are their own genus. So species, genus, they are, and there's now 200, maybe there's 315 individuals left in the world of this genus. And the Hirola antelope are really safely or really strongly admired by a local community near the coast of northern Kenya. The government tried to come in and herd up all these antelope about probably 10 years ago now and move them into Tsavo National Park. And the community chased off the government and said, these are our antelope, you can't take them. So it's a great story about how the community is really trying to protect them. The problem is that they had a disease outbreak of rendipest that dropped the population low. And so with the numbers low, they can't protect themselves against leopard and other predators. And so they've never had a chance to rebound. So we built a big sanctuary and got out all the predators. And that's a captive breeding herd. And so now the Hirola population has done really well, to the point where we're out of space and we're looking to A, expand the sanctuary, and then B, move some of those individuals back into the wild and into Tsavo National Park. So short answer is that the Hirola are actually doing really well, thanks to this intervention and thanks to the community, right? So this is the whole story here, is it's not about fencing and protecting and defending animals for animals' sake. It's about including people. And when the local communities see the value, you know, that's our best frontline defense right there, when the community really values their wildlife.
Matt, really interesting question. So let's see, what's your advice to a young conservationist who wants to begin a career in Africa?
It's a great question. It's actually a question I get a lot. My advice is always jump on an airplane and head over there. You know, it's hard for a local NGO or a local community group to make any kind of promise about creating a job or an opportunity with someone sitting in Connecticut or Boston. you got to be there. You got to have face to face. So when things clear up, I would figure out where you want to go and, volunteer for 6 months. And if you're in a place and you're meeting the right people, an opportunity will materialize.
What would a person would be interested in hearing some recent examples of investments in the region? What's proven most effective to maximizing the benefit of TNC conservation dollars?
Yeah, I mean, a number of things. So we've started a for-profit livestock to markets program where we're buying cattle from communities and we're bringing the market to them, which reduces the risk where they don't have to walk their cattle, 10 or 12 kilometers. And then we're selling it. We've negotiated higher prices with some of the supermarket chains, and we actually bring them back to a private piece of land. We fatten them and then sell them for a higher price than the local community would have. And then we give we split the difference of the profit, and we use that money to cover the program, recycle the revenue, and it's a revolving fund basically. And that's all done with, and only with, communities that are managing their grass better and thinking about good governance of their wildlife and of their habitat. So it's a positive reinforcement. We've done a lot of work with fisheries on Lake Tanganyika, freshwater fisheries, and looking at value chain improvements, creating drying racks so they can dry their sardines on a screen and therefore not have stones and rocks in them. And that increases their value to market by about 20%. We're doing a lot of carbon projects, avoided deforestation carbon projects that are bringing, we're now almost $400,000 to a hunter-gatherer community in northern Tanzania. So we use philanthropy to seed a lot of these innovative ideas, and then we look for market-based solutions that can kind of scale them and sustain them over time. So what we really focus on is how do we create, more durable solutions that are linked to that local and even sometimes international economies.
A couple more questions related to poaching. I'm going to fold two of them together, and you can be the judge of whether I've done so unwisely. But one is, how has technology enhanced the conservation community's ability to combat poaching? And the other has to do with, over the time that you've been in Africa, have you seen a change in attitude on the part of locals toward poaching and the value of conservation of wildlife?
Yeah, I think it's good to lump those, James. Use of technology has helped a lot. On the patrol side, we use a smartphone, we're not using iPhones, we're using Samsungs, but it's a smartphone that has a GPS built into it. And so we can record exactly where the rangers are going. And then when they get to a poached zebra, for example, they can enter it in right there. And that data is uploaded instantly. So the national parks in Tanzania, across all of their 15 parks, across this massive country, that data is then, when the rangers come back and sync their device to the internet in their office, out in the park, that data instantly goes into headquarters. And so headquarters can see real time what's going on, and they can think about allocating more resources and seeing trends in poaching. Drones are a great thing. We're not using drones for anti-poaching, but we are using drones for habitat analysis and tracking trends in vegetation change or grass condition over time. And also for monitoring wildlife, drones are fantastic. We use a lot of aerial surveys for our work. So the ultimate indicator of all the protection and all the habitat is how are the wildlife actually responding. So we're trying to do elephant counts every 2 years now in Zambia. And the technology about how we count elephants from imagery from airplanes has gotten markedly better year after year. We're actually partnered with the Paul Allen Foundation, their company Vulcan, on elephant census in Zambia and bringing some of the latest and greatest technologies there. Um, and now I forgot the second part of the question.
Second part of the question was, Matt, about the change in the perception of locals or the valuation of wildlife conservation.
Yeah. So there are some amazing stories, and we have good empirical data, and we have some great anecdotal stories about people whose impressions of wildlife have significantly changed over time. I mean, we do a project with the San Diego Zoo at the same reserve I talked about, Loisaba, and they are going around in the surrounding communities and have been doing this now for 2 years, asking questions about perceptions toward wildlife. Giraffe, leopard, lion, elephant, and we are seeing an exponential increase in people's they're becoming more positive about wildlife because they are linking the benefits of schools and jobs to those wildlife. What's interesting is if you compare that, James, to an area where there is not a big conservation focus and or not much tourism, in other words, where people are living alongside wildlife, like in Botswana. There was a great story in the New York Times last year of a woman who regrettably and very sadly has lost her son and her husband to elephants. They were both trampled and killed in their farm field because elephants, that's the largest population of elephants in Africa. And for her, elephants are pests. They're worse than pests, they're killers. And so she hasn't seen any positive benefit. Instead, she's obviously seen the opposite. So we don't take it for granted. And for local people who don't see any benefit from wildlife, wildlife are actually just a pest for them. They raid their crops, lions kill their cattle, children are often threatened and sometimes trampled by elephants on their way to school. So it's really important that we focus on that as part of our set of interventions.
What are the external pressures that we need to protect most against? Is it development, loss of habitat, poaching, climate change? And what is our strategy other than strengthening traditional societal structures?
Yeah, so land use change is the biggest one in Africa. I mean, there's a number. There's the direct killing of animals to support the illegal wildlife market is a big one. We're seeing 1,000 rhinoceros killed every year in South Africa because of demand for the horn in Vietnam. That's a global supply and demand issue. We can continue to throw millions and millions of dollars at frontline protection until we figure out the demand side and begin to reduce demand and price. We're not going to have much impact there. So that's one. Another one is habitat conversion. The unplanned expansion of agriculture and urban settlements is a problem. We've lost a lot of grassland habitat. We're losing a lot of forest habitat. So having better zoning and planning at the local government level, and also recognizing, again, tourism, the value of keeping habitat intact for wildlife and making sure that those benefits are supporting the local community is a good way to underscore the importance of that. Obviously, climate change is impacting everyone. The rain patterns are changing. People are having a harder time feeding their cattle than they did 20 years ago. Crops are being planted with less certainty today than they were even 5 years ago. When the rains start to come, are they going to continue through the season or are they going to stop? We don't know. And so every single person, rural person living in these countries in Africa can give you very clear example of how weather patterns are changing and how the climate is being impacted by the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. So thinking about climate mitigation, how do we reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere? Our goal for TNC with partners is to try and get 8 gigatons of CO2 out of the atmosphere so that we can live in a world that doesn't rise more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. And then locally at climate adaptation, James, how do people maybe shift to tubers from maize because they can handle changes in rainfall better? How do people shift from cattle to maybe camels, which are more resilient to drought? We're actually seeing that shift right now in northern Kenya. So climate is a big, big issue that needs more attention. And we need to spend more time thinking about that. And we all know that that's a global problem. You know, emissions in a country far away can impact someone living in a completely different part of the world.
Matt, I'm curious, you know, in Africa, the conversation around climate change, what is the perception, and how much does it vary from community to community or country to country, in terms of, you know, is climate change the thing that people are talking about when they see impacts on weather patterns, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in my own personal experience traveling around, you know, the last 12 years, but even just the last 2 years, whether you're talking to a minister in government or whether you're talking to an octopus fisherwoman on the coast of Kenya, they all will tell you with very concrete example how things are changing, and they are all, you know, worried about it. And so a lot of talk about climate smart agriculture or conservation agriculture or climate proofed fisheries. Everyone's looking for ways, James, to continue to utilize nature, and recognize that it's changing, and how do we be smarter about that. So one of the things that the Nature Conservancy is focused on is what we call natural climate solutions. How do we use our nature? How do we use our oceans? How do we use our rivers? How do we use our land, and keep it forested, keep those reef systems healthy so that they can be more resilient? I'll go back to the ocean. If we keep the reef system healthy in the ocean and don't have too much ecotourism on the Great Barrier Reef, we don't hit it too hard with fisheries on the coast of Kenya, if that reef system stays healthy, just like a human body, it's going to have a better immune system. So when there is a spike in temperature because of a warming event, it's going to be more durable, and it's going to respond better to that stress than a reef system that's completely, you know, got a lot of pressure on it and completely hammered, and basically has a weak immune system. So we use nature to help build climate resilience by making sure it's as healthy and intact as it can be. And that helps us basically bank for the future.
I think that's a really good segue to another question that caught my eye. It was one that I was curious about as well, and that's if you could talk a little bit more about TNC's work to improve water sustainability in Africa.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have one of our thematic programs is on source water protection, and you know, as the population is growing, Africa's 1 billion people today, sub-Saharan Africa, and predicted to get to 2.5. Nairobi's going to double. It's already 4.5 million people. It will double in the next 30 years. Where do those people in Nairobi get their water from? Well, actually, we, TNC and partners, are working to help protect the source water for Nairobi by better managing the watershed. And so we've created, this is an example of our creative financial solutions, James. We've created what we call a water fund, where the downstream users of water, through the city utility and their rate, their tax they pay for water, and big users like East Africa breweries and Coca-Cola, are paying into a fund, and that fund then disperses money to do better management of the watershed. The big issue there is it's a farmed landscape, and so we're trying to get farmers to have less erosion and less sediment flowing into the tributaries that then form the Tana River. And if we can have less sediment, then the cost of provisioning water to the residents in Nairobi goes down. Today, of those 4.5 million residents in Nairobi, 60% of them are water insecure, meaning, you know, 2 to 3 days a week, when they turn their taps on, nothing comes out. So there's not water flowing into their apartment complex or into their neighborhood because the utility is simply rationing the water because demand is greater than supply. So our goal is to reduce the sediment by 15% off of the farms by implementing better farm practice, which will then reduce the cost, and then the city can open up, you know, more pipes to bring water into the city. So it's an example, but basically, you know, how do we keep the watershed intact so that water continues to flow into these urban areas.
Matt, you've touched on this, and we'll see if there is anything else that you'd like to maybe highlight in response to this question. But the question is about describing examples of the most creative financing that we've seen or used.
Well, so I mean, one of the best examples is in the Seychelles, where we did a national debt restructure, and we used the proceeds from that debt restructure, where we got a better interest rate, and we brought in some philanthropy. So we brought in $5 million of grant money, philanthropy, and then we refinanced about $15 million of debt to then create a revenue stream that finances new conservation areas. And in exchange for all of that, the Seychelles government put 400,000 square kilometers, an area the size of Germany, into new protected areas, new marine conservation areas. And this trust fund that we set up is then financing it year after year after year. Not the full cost, but financing a part of the management costs of these new areas. So that's an interesting one at a national scale, James, and we're trying to do more of those. We're trying to do the same thing now in Kenya. That one's going to be quite large. It could be, a couple $100 million that we refinance. We're looking at Tanzania. We're looking at Angola, Gabon, number of countries. And then at a smaller scale, we've done, the livestock market, the beadworks, a lot of tourism things that we're investing in that have tried to use interesting investments as a way to incent better behavior. We've actually just done a cool program in northern Kenya with grasslands and carbon. And by changing grazing practice with the herders, the pastoralists, we leave healthier grass behind rather than having too many animals and never letting it rest. If you can let it rest and move those animals on, and I'm talking, cattle and sheep and goats, then the grass is healthier and has more roots and it stores more carbon. And so we've now got this project validated and it's selling carbon credits, and we expect it to generate $1.5 million of revenue a year for these wildlife conservancies in northern Kenya through a voluntary carbon market. So a pretty cool example of some of the innovation we're thinking about. Nice thing about carbon is, James, it doesn't get impacted by a global pandemic like coronavirus. So it's not dependent upon travel. What we need to do is have more diversified funding streams for our work. So that's the key thing we're actually really trying to figure out.
A more country-specific question here. Are we active, is TNC active in South Africa? And if so, what's the strategy and who are the primary TNC partners in South Africa?
Yeah, so we have an office in Cape Town. I think we now have 8 people employed in South Africa. We have an office in Johannesburg too, but it's a one-person office. Our entry point to South Africa was around fresh water and protecting water. So the water fund that I mentioned a minute ago in Nairobi, we're doing one in Cape Town, and we've got 4 other source water protection projects on the books. Major partner is the city of Cape Town, and then WWF, number of other local partners in Cape Town. And it's a really interesting project where we're actually restoring the Earth's most biodiverse and interesting floral kingdom, vegetation complex, the fynbos, which is part of the Mediterranean habitat type. So we're trying to remove invasive pine trees that have moved into that area, restore the local vegetation, which is much more like a xeriscape, more climate proofed, more climate resilient. And by doing so, we are going to create 2 months, the equivalent of 2 months of additional drinking water for the city of Cape Town, at a cost far cheaper than the desalination plant that the city was going to bring on. So it's been a really interesting project. But the focus in South Africa today is the source water or freshwater protection.
Interesting anecdote there. As you know, one of our colleagues here in Massachusetts did some work with in South Africa on the GIS portion, I believe, of the Water Fund project. Always lots of connections within the Nature Conservancy where we are able to tap into resources across the world, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I always tell our partners one of the best things about TNC is you might be talking to me or you might be talking to our South Africa director, but what you don't know is there's 4,000 staff sitting in Brisbane, sitting in Boston, sitting in Bombay, all available to help provide technical support. So it's a good team, and it's one of the key reasons why I think TNC is a great organization.
Yeah. So we have a few minutes left, and we do have. Again, I'll apologize in advance. I know we aren't going to get to every question, but we'll do our best. I have one I'm eyeing as the closer, but going back to poaching, just a question about does the practice of removing the tusk from the bulls help with deterring poaching?
Yeah, it does for sure. Yes, and so there are some reserves, particularly in South Africa, where they've cut off the tusk. There's a slight alternative perspective, which is that elephants use their tusks to scrape bark off of trees. They also use their tusks to fight and posture with other animals. So does it affect their behavior? Another perspective, which is really interesting, is tusk size is actually genetic. And so as some of the big tuskers have been removed on the continent, over the last 80 years, and as those with small tusks, or even some elephants that don't have tusks, we are seeing more elephants born now without tusks. So in Zambia in particular, there's a whole whole herd of, not an entire herd, but there are many individuals within a herd in Lower Zambezi National Park that don't have tusks. And that's pretty interesting. And that goes against the theory that, they really need their tusks to survive, because here are some that are born without tusks, which may just be, natural selection. Those are the ones that are not poached, and therefore they are surviving. So yeah, that's a measure that can be taken. Rhino too, a lot of places we cut the horn off the rhino. The rhino horn will continue to grow back. And so again, it's cost, it's quite expensive. You gotta dart the animal. You gotta have a veterinary team come in. You've got to remove those tusks. You've got to remove the horn. And then you have to do it again every, 2 years probably. But it is a tactic that works, James. Yeah.
So I'm going to throw this one out, and I'm thinking it might end up being the last question. So thinking about the next 5 years or so, where do you see the biggest opportunities for the Nature Conservancy conservation to scale work across the region?
It's a great question. We're just starting a really interesting program in Angola to help formally protect, with government, new national parks, and maybe the first freshwater protected areas in Africa, like some wild and scenic river designations of the Quito and Kobongo rivers that feed into the Okavango Delta. The Okavango Delta is home to the world's largest elephant population, and one of the world's most iconic wilderness sites ever. And it's at risk because in Southeast Angola, the population is growing, and they've got a plan to put 28 small hydro dams on those two rivers. Angola doesn't see any benefit from tourism. And so what we're trying to figure out here is, can we use sort of a bilateral, multi-country agreement where some of the benefit that Botswana sees from the Delta, from their tourism, is actually paid to the country to the north, to Angola, to help them implement more sustainable ways of doing agriculture and some solar and wind energy production rather than hydro, so that those rivers continue to flow, and put permanent protection along those rivers so that they are protected forever. And those are the types of things that, you know, we find really exciting as TNC, where we can feel strong and feel like permanent protection has occurred as a result of our support and our work with local government and local partners. Another one, James, is I mentioned the ocean protection work, but we're gonna be doing a lot more work with national governments on their ocean protections. Oceans are, you know, unprotected compared to a lot of other ecological systems. And there's a big focus right now and a lot of appetite from government, multiple governments, to try and think more sustainably about their blue economy. So how can they continue to get a lot of revenue from tuna and from tourism in a way that is sustainable? And so having better protected areas and thinking about climate proofing their ocean is really critical. So that's a big growth area for us. And I guess finally, you know, we've actually got some leadership programs. I think investing in people and building a really strong cadre of African conservationists who are graduating from university, who have the skills. The conservation scene in Africa is still largely a foreigner-led game, and we need to change that. We need Africans to drive conservation in Africa. It's a big focus.
Matt, I am feeling very certain I'm not alone, and just being very appreciative of the conversation today. And I also appreciate, we have such incredible questions. It makes it easy, but it's really eye-opening, informative, and you know, in what can be kind of a daunting world, also the feeling of optimism and potential. And I think that's an awesome thing. So is there anything, before we kind of wrap up today, is there anything you would like to add, Matt?
Well, I mean, thanks to all of you for listening. If you're a trustee or a supporter to the Nature Conservancy and to any other conservation effort, Audubon, Mass Audubon, thank you. You know, the Earth needs your help now more than ever, I would say. And Earth Day was yesterday, as we all know. Secondly, James, I think, you know, this is where TNC is at its greatest, where we can work in Massachusetts and work locally and feel really good about our backyard, and recognize that we're one globe, and how you could get drawn into support international work. So thanks to you and Liz and the team in Massachusetts for hosting us. We rely a lot on our partnerships with US chapters. We are one organization, and we are at our best when we work locally and globally. So thanks for hosting us.
Our pleasure, absolutely. And thank you again. So folks, it's almost 1, so I think we'll wrap up. Again, just wonderful conversation. Please, everyone, stay in touch with TNC. You can find us on the web, of course, on nature.org/mass, nature.org/Africa. Africa program, Massachusetts, we have multiple social media accounts as well. And we will be sending out a follow-up couple of days or so, and we'll have some follow-up information from the conversation, things that were touched on here, and certainly if there are other things that you want to hear about, please let us know. And again, thanks everyone. Be well, and we hope to see you next time.
Thanks, James. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.